What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel, if indeed you are a returning viewer. Thank you. If you're new to the channel, welcome along. I would fully encourage you to hit the subscribe button just down there in the corner. It's I hope it'll be well worth your time. Hit notification bell as well, because I'm putting a lot of effort into this channel this year, which means there's going to be loads of content coming your way that I hope you'll find interesting. Because if you're into technology, cars, fast cars, racing cars, like I am, it's all going to be centered around that. So, I mean, go on, what have you got to lose? You can always unsubscribe later if you don't like it. Go on, do it now, just do it now. Hit that button in the corner. It only take a second. I'll wait for you. Alright, we good? Okay, well today we're going to be talking about the Australian Grand Prix, but of course, because it's me, we're going to be doing it from a very technical point of view. Now in a minute we're going to go home and I'm going to do some laps on the Xbox around Albert Park and just show you some of the technical challenge that the teams and drivers face. But let's just quickly talk about the circuit, because this is the first race of the season. Now back in my day when I first started working in Formula 1, you'd be lucky if you finished the Australian Grand Prix, the first race of the season, because you were pushing the technology to the absolute limits. Today, with engines that have to, only 3 of them to last the entire season, we're nowhere near those limits anymore. So the race of attrition that it used to be is not necessarily still the case. So that's one thing. Having said that though, it is quite a demanding circuit. It's a circuit that is demanding on power units because there's lots of start-stop action, there's lots of hard acceleration out of slow corners. It's a really bumpy circuit as well. So the suspension really has to do its job around this place and takes a bit of a hammering as well. It's a difficult track to drive. It is a street circuit, but it's an incredibly fast street circuit. Get it wrong though, and you will end up in a wall. It's also a circuit that, because it doesn't get used very much and it is a public park, most of these streets are open streets to the public for much of the season, much of the year. It means that for the beginning of the weekend, the track's very green, almost no grip until the rubber starts going down over the weekend, and very quickly it evolves into a much higher grip circuit. And actually, from the moment the cars start running on Friday morning in FP1, you can see a lap time change of nearly 2 seconds by the time you get towards FP3 on a Saturday morning, just because of circuit evolution and the drivers getting themselves in the zone. That's an enormous shift. The tyres are the C2, C3 and C4, and uniquely this is exactly the same tyre that we had for this race last year. We don't normally get that situation, so drivers and teams have a big understanding of what this circuit demands from the tyres and what they need to get out of their tyres to make it work. What is different though is that the 2020 cars are considerably faster than they were this time last year, and that will be a bit of an unknown going into the weekend. How will the tyres cope under those extra speeds, under the slightly later braking, under the faster cornering demands that these things will be put through this weekend? Those are all things that will have to be worked out throughout the practice sessions. But anyway, that's enough of that. Let's get home, let's do some laps on the sim, and we'll talk you through exactly what the car and drivers and teams are going through step by step as we go around the circuit. Right, since being out with the dogs, I've got home to see the news that McLaren have had to pull out of the Australian Grand Prix because a member of the team have tested positive for the coronavirus. Now, that's shocking, that's terrible news, particularly for that guy, and even more so for his family and the families of all of those people who have family members in the Formula 1 circus. That was my first thought on this. So many people will have been questioning the decision to go to the other side of the world in such unprecedented, uncertain times before leaving for Australia. I'm sure families of F1 team members will have all been having those conversations. And now, some of those people will be stuck on the other side of the planet, almost certainly some of them in quarantine for at least probably 2 weeks, I'd imagine, with their worried families at home able to do nothing about it. It's a terrible situation that, probably should never have happened. I don't want to go into the politics of whether F1 got it right or wrong, because I think it's such an unprecedented situation that it was very difficult to predict what happened. Yes, of course, they could have done things differently. They could still be doing things differently, and we'll have to wait for their official response to what McLaren have done and what the other teams might do in response to that. But I've just actually got off the phone to some friends of mine in the McLaren team who have been told to stay in their hotel room. It's night time right now as I record this in Australia, so they're in the rooms anyway, but they're not allowed to go out whilst they work out what the next steps might be. So really difficult and worrying times for everybody down there. So massive thoughts with them and of course with all the families that are left back home. I've decided to carry on with this little preview because my feeling actually is that the race is very unlikely to go ahead now. I kind of said that in yesterday's video. I'd be surprised if it actually happens. But either way, I thought whether it doesn't happen, whether it happens or not, we'll do the video because hopefully it might be an interesting video around the technical challenge of this particular circuit anyway, and might still offer some value. So let's crack on with this. Right, let's start here. The entry to the final corner of this lap. I'll talk more as we get around the back end of the lap, but just setting yourself up for the start of this lap is crucially important around here because it comes from a couple of tight and twisty slow corners onto a long straight. Your exit out of this final corner is critical to getting the power down. If you come out of here all kind of squirmy and getting a bit of a loss of traction as you get the power down onto here, you'll be losing time. Your delta will be losing all the way along this straight. You'll be losing time all the way down. You'll never reach your maximum speed that you need to get to when you get to the bottom. So pit lane on the right hand side, pit lane exit just there. Now well over 200 miles an hour, the fastest part on the circuit as we approach this corner. What's happening right now is the DRS is slamming closed. The driver's leaping onto the brakes. All of the weight transfer is lunging forwards as the car pitches its nose down towards the racetrack. And what that means is that weight transfer, which you want to encourage around this circuit, really helps the braking. As the weight moves to the front axle, it helps you to stop locking the front brakes, which it really wants to do under that much loading. The rear end, of course, can go light, so you need to balance that, but your spring setup needs to be such that you allow a bit more weight transfer around this track than you might do at some others. Once you have got it stopped, get it tucked in here, not losing too much speed, using a little bit of curb, because then it's quite flat, but you're still turning around this exit. This exit curb here is pretty tricky. Get too much on it and the car will bounce out of shape. That's one of the things around this circuit. The curbs are pretty brutal and it's a really bumpy circuit. Second DRS zone there, so again, same sort of thing with the weight transfer into this, what normally is a pretty slow corner. Not quite as slow as turn one, but you've got to get the car really well slowed down, then right back over to the right hand side before turning in left. Big curbs through this part. If you take too much curb there, the underside of the car, the plank, can bottom out on the curb and can launch you up into the air. Really not what you want, because at that point the wheels are off the ground, you've got very little control. This is really fast through here. It's easy to run wide out onto the grass and then you're in all kinds of trouble. It's a fast section, this part here. Again, big slam onto the brakes, but a quick turn in. Short, sharp corners through here. And then flat all the way through this really sweeping fast section here. This part here is really where you're relying on the aero of the car to do its thing. Big stop at the end of it from very high speed again. And into a quick chicane with a long sweeping left-hander again, flat out. Very easy to kiss the wall if you're not careful through there. Flat all the way down here, everything you've got from the car. Again, really high speed. Jump on the brakes, down perhaps one gear, but really fast through 11 and 12. This is a part of the circuit you can lose or gain time massively because again, it's flat all the way around here. Another DRS zone before another big stop. Almost right-hand turn through there, and that's where it's all about. Lots of these. I'll slow it down here again because lots of these corners where you're going right-angled, stop, start, that's what makes this circuit what we call a longitudinally limited circuit. That means it's all about traction and braking. The limitations of the car are whether you can get the car stopped in time and whether you can get the power down without getting too much loss of traction. A loss of traction or wheel spin out of these slower corners where you've got to accelerate out of a slow corner, first of all means you lose time because you're not pushing the car forward as you put the power down, but secondly, and perhaps much more importantly, you start to overheat tyres very quickly. And by the end of this lap, as we're coming to now, it's very easy, if you have had a little bit of wheel spin, to have an overheated rear tyre, and particularly this corner here, the penultimate corner, really difficult. You come into it quite fast and it's really a second gear corner. You've got to get the car slowed down, but it's so easy to lock the wheels, lock a tyre, and then when you get pushed wide at the exit because of that, desperately trying to get back on the power. As I said before, the last couple of corners are critical to your lap time. This corner here is really what can make or break you. If you can get the car stopped and down to the minimum speed that it needs in the race, you've got to get yourself through this corner and then immediately back over to the left-hand side. If you're going into the pit lane during the race, you can take this corner far quicker because the pit lane entry is over to the right-hand side and you don't need to pull the car back over. But getting it over here, particularly in qualifying, is critical to setting yourself up. Power's got to start going down now, building up speed, exiting this corner as fast as possible without any wheel spin, DRS open, and back onto this start-finish straight to start another lap of this, what is really a tremendous circuit. There you go. It's a really wonderful circuit, this, and I know it doesn't always produce the best racing, but as a racetrack to drive and as an event, I can promise you every single person in the Formula One paddock loves going there. And I know that this year is obviously very different. The whole world is in this weird phase right now that's unprecedented, as I said before. But this is a truly brilliant event, brilliant way to start the season. It's going to be a real shame if it doesn't happen. Seems inevitable at this point, but we'll have to wait and see. But either way, you know, this is a great track, as I said, a real challenge for the teams because you have to deal with the bumps. In terms of setting your car up, you need to have a slightly softer suspension setup that can cope with those bumps, but, you know, not too soft that you don't compromise your aero platform. You want the car to be stable and remain as flat or as a stable platform as you can, but you have to allow a little bit of weight transfer, as I talked about with the braking, equally trying to get the traction down as you launch out of these slow corners. A little bit of weight transfer towards the rear obviously moves that weight onto the rear axle and helps prevent wheel spin as you launch away from these slow turns. So that's really important. That's one of the biggest areas. Downforce, you know, this is a relatively high downforce circuit. And you might look at that and say, well, it's a bit strange because it has some long straights. It does, but it also has 3 DRS zones for the first thing, which mean that you're able to dump a lot of that drag along the parts of the circuit where you need it. But also qualifying is crucially important here. It's not the easiest place to overtake on, which means a lot of focus gets put on qualifying. And to get a better qualifying lap, you probably want a higher downforce car where you don't need to think about the longevity so much of a race run. Getting max down or higher downforce to enable you to get out of those corners and get through those corners quickly is what most people start to look towards. So a slightly higher downforce setup, a slightly softer in terms of pitch, dive and pitch, and something in terms of your spring and damper setup that gives you a little bit more compliance to cope with what is a very bumpy circuit. If the suspension is too stiff at that point, the bumps unsettle the car, make it very, very fragile for a driver. You can be quick with a stiff race car, but if the bumps unsettle you, you'll be off and into that wall before you know it. So you've got to have a balance where slightly wider window, if you like, setup window. And also, of course, the circuit's constantly changing. It's an evening Grand Prix normally, which means that the temperatures get lower. The circuit can be tree-lined along certain areas. The track surface can really change and drop in temperature, which means managing those tyre temperatures is a constant challenge that's changing all the way through, but equally something that has a massive bearing on the performance of your car. So definitely not an easy event, but hopefully a great event. And look, if it doesn't happen, hopefully you've still enjoyed this little video as a little explainer and might give you a bit of insight into the engineers and the drivers' way of looking at these racetracks. Perhaps that might be slightly different to the way some fans look at it. Anyway, thanks very much. We'll keep an eye on the situation. As I say, thoughts with everybody involved. And let's spare a little moment for all those people that have been left at home when their family members have been sent off around the world to go and work on this show that we all love to watch. I will see you all very soon. Ta-da!